Welcome back to Contractor Evolution. Benji and Igor here from our Vancouver-based studio.
So when you think about the security of your business, a few obvious threats might pop into your mind. A break-in at the office or shop, expensive equipment getting lifted out of a work truck, materials like lumber, copper, even shingles mysteriously disappearing from a site. Stuff like this happens not infrequently. But what unknown risks to your business lurk online? How secure is your IT infrastructure against cyber attacks? Like having a commercial grade pressure washer evaporate out of the back of an F-150 admittedly sucks. I know it's happened to me many times. But what if you logged into your CRM one morning to find every file and folder had been encrypted, rendered inaccessible, leaving your entire operation completely hamstrung? What if your AP person, without knowing it, sent $25K, not to your legitimate vendor whom you owed money, but to a sophisticated hacker posing perfectly as them? Cyber attacks are on the rise, and if you think your contracting business simply wouldn't be a target, think again.
So our guest on the show today is Omer Segoly, the founder of Cyber Unit, and they are our own trusted advisor for cybersecurity and IT support, and they have been for years. Omer is not your typical IT guy. He is really cool, and he grew up in Israel where he learned to hack and master computer systems. Now, don't worry, he only ever pulled some innocent kind of digital pranks before joining the good side, like remotely opening and closing your CD tray, swapping out some desktop images, and leaving funny messages. But through all that, he realized that hacking into people's computers was actually very easy. He was doing it as a 13-year-old. Now, after immigrating to Canada, he founded Cyber Unit, which specializes in cybersecurity for small businesses just like yours. He and his team keep roughly 150 companies safe and secure in an online world that is becoming increasingly dangerous. This whole conversation might seem a bit kind of doom and gloom, but trust us, you would rather learn these truths today, right now, from him than find out the excruciatingly hard way. So today we talk about the most common and real threats to your business and how to avoid them. Plus, he breaks down the what we might call cybersecurity starter pack that even the least techie entrepreneur could implement in a matter of days. So let's dive into it with Omer. You're watching Contractor Evolution, where we unpack the systems, tactics, and skills you need to take your fast-growing contracting business to the next level.
You're here to learn what it takes to scale up, work less, and increase profitability. You've come to the right place.
Stay tuned to learn what separates the new breed of contractor from the old school, and welcome to your ultimate guide on the business of contracting. Omer, it's good to see you. Welcome to the show and to the studio.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you, Omar. I think we'll just start with this. Like this whole cyber attack, cyber security conversation seems to be sort of trending right now. It seems to be increasingly common, and I don't know if that's just the media trying to scare people or if it's legit. But it's sort of like on our collective consciousness more now than maybe any other time before. Can you give us sort of a grand tour for us caveman like myself who aren't super techie, who aren't deep down the rabbit hole on this stuff like you are? What is going on the macro level right now that we should be aware of that might explain sort of the spike or the increase in some of this activity of late?
You're right. Yeah, it seems to be getting out of hands. It's getting to the point where really that cybersecurity is something that you need to be thinking about. And 2-3 years ago, that was not the case. Let me tell you that a couple of years ago, if I'd be talking to a business owner, a contractor, any kind of business owner, we would have to do a lot of education as to why you really need to be thinking about cybersecurity and the risk around it. And the tables have really turned, I will say, in the last couple of years. At the macro level, the reality is there's a lot of money to be made for cyber criminals. Mm-hmm. It's really getting out of hands. 2015, about $3 trillion was the cost of cybercrime worldwide. By 2025, 10 years later, we're looking at about $10.5 trillion. That's bigger than most countries' entire GDPs.
By 2025. Yeah. So that's 3 years away.
Yeah. So this is a huge industry
in the upward direction at a very alarming rate.
Yeah, causing damage I mean, we think about criminals in a much more traditional sense, but criminal activity in the cyber world, you're saying, is a giant industry that's growing quickly.
It's a lot more profitable than illegal drugs even. So a lot of the organized crime groups, nation state actors as well, they're shifting their focus to cyber crime.
Because of how much damage can be done inside of a company when you have a major like cyber related attack.
Yeah, and also how easy it is for them to execute it, and we can get more into that as well.
Yeah, so you would think, your typical contractor, a home builder, a landscaper, painting business, I would be more concerned about someone breaking into my vehicle and stealing my stuff, stealing equipment, maybe them getting onto a site before lockup and taking materials that we're going to use. There's sort of these like more traditional threats to a business's security that I think most people would be familiar with. In the cyber world and the digital world, what is like the primary incentive that these actors or groups of actors have to launch an attack? In broad strokes, like what are they trying to get their hands on a lot of the time?
So it could be a couple of reasons. One, for some attacks, they're coming after your intellectual property.
Right.
That doesn't really relate to contractors, however. With contractors and similar businesses, what we're seeing is that they typically would be coming after your crown jewel. They would be essentially trying to put a stop to your operations and stop and essentially force you into buying your data back or buying your operations
in a straight exchange
back.
for money.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they get your data, they encrypt it, they make it unavailable. They essentially shut down your CRM or your tech stack entirely and are saying, hey, if you want to get your business back up and running again, it's going to cost you 10 grand, it's going to cost you 30 grand, whatever. And it's essentially an exchange like that. They're trying to get their data, or they're trying to get your data so they can monetize it in some fashion.
A lot of times that is the case. Other times, it's maybe using you as a vector or a vehicle to spread malware elsewhere. So they know that like your clients, your vendors are trusting you. And when they get an email from you, for example, they most likely will open it. They might even open the attachment more often than not. And so they might even use you as a vehicle to spread malware to all your contacts in your mailbox, for example. And that seems to be very effective.
Yeah. So I run, so just to clarify here, so the situation would be like, I run a roofing company. I've got in my system between my produced jobs, my booked jobs, the estimates I've done, and all the leads that I haven't even, let's just say I've got like 5,000 to 6,000 contacts between all those groups. You're saying they could literally infiltrate our system and then send emails that look very much as if they're on our behalf to all of our leads, houses we've estimated, jobs we've booked, we've produced, all that stuff to try to extract some sort of information.
That's exactly it. And a lot of times it would be on your behalf. It would be actually coming out of your actual
Our domain.
mailbox, your actual domain. Yeah. And most often you won't even know about it. It's happening behind the scenes. All of a sudden you're getting weird emails. People are, responding to those emails, or you're getting like automatic replies, and, you're wondering what is going on.
But at that point, it's too late.
It's already too late. Yeah.
You'd mentioned some really big alarming numbers at the beginning, like 3 trillion in 2015, moving towards 10 trillion in 2025. Like, this might sound like a basic question, but can you just like help explain for me like how the industry has developed around this? Like, who are these people? Where do they live? Where is this stuff happening? Like, what is the typical day in the life of one of these kind of shady hacker type persons or groups look like?
Yeah, so a lot of times when we think about hackers, we think about, that guy with the black hoodie.
Yeah,
right?
in a cave.
I think it's somebody from the Matrix, or like someone in like a bunker in Serbia or something doing something weird overseas. Is that the case, or is that just a stereotype?
It is a stereotype. A lot, really, in the reality is these people they wake up in the morning, they put their clothes on, and they go to the office, much like we do. They go into an office building. They're not usually working from home. These people they have actual offices. They have cubicles. They have VoIP phones sitting on their desk, and it's a job. They have benefits. They have all of that.
So they get dressed. They put on their nice shirt. They get in the car.
They have a card. Yeah,
they get in the car. They drive to work. Yeah, this is legit.
That's it.
It's big business.
It is. There's so much money in there. It's so profitable that it really has become an extremely effective business.
Yeah, so Benji Carlson, hacker. So let's do a bit of a rundown of like the most common threats. I'm sure that there's a much longer list and we could get super technical, but maybe give us like 4 or 5 of the most common attacks that you see launched that we should make our listeners aware of.
Okay, so ransomware has become a household name. Everybody's heard of it by now. A couple of years ago, definitely wasn't the case. Ransomware, for those who haven't heard of it yet, what that means is somebody gets into your system, they figure out, again, what is your crown jewel? What is really used to run your operations? They'll figure it out pretty quickly. If you haven't figured it out by now, they will figure it out for you. They'll come after it. Essentially what they'll do is they don't necessarily delete the data, but they encrypt it. So it's essentially deleted, because when you try to open a file, it will not open. It's a corrupted file. There will be another file that typically they will add into your folders that will say, read me or open me. And when you open it, it essentially gives you a countdown.
Right. A timer.
24, 48 hours. You have to pay X amounts of dollars in Bitcoin, or else you lose all your data for life.
Yeah.
Right.
So the situation would be, so let's just say like 10 years ago, I was running quite a large home service company. We had a lot of crews doing 4 to 5 jobs a day, 2 people in each van, and there's a ton of vans rolling around, and they all use one centralized system. Like I don't necessarily talk to any of them in the morning, but they would roll in at 7:30 a.m. They'd be in the van, and from the system, they know what their first job is, the address, all the specifics. It was a window cleaning, gutter cleaning, pressure washing, and then they would do that job. They would invoice the customer through it. Then they'd know how to get to their next job. They would do all their job, like time clocking. They'd clock in, clock out. It's tied to payroll. All those systems could be shut down essentially.
Yeah, I
Within
mean,
the
a lot of times
situation.
they'll come after perhaps one of those systems. A lot of times your files, your data it's a low hanging fruit for them.
Yeah.
But we're also starting to see ransomware in the cloud. So traditionally they would come after your file system, your server, but they realize and they recognize that today the reality is a lot of people don't have a physical server in the back of their office.
Yeah, I'm
anymore.
using a CRM that I
so
use.
you're
It's a
using
SaaS
exactly
business, yeah.
CRM, you're using Google Drive, you're using OneDrive and Microsoft. And so they actually have developed techniques over the last couple of years that allow them to essentially encrypt data that's in the cloud. And
Right.
the problem is that we're way too trusting.
With these third parties that we're giving really, really valuable information to and essentially run our entire organization through. Those are also, just because you log in and create an account and pay them doesn't necessarily mean that they're 100% secure either. But this just going back to this ransomware idea for a second, like the core concept is they disrupt your operation in a way that is so severe that you are motivated enough to essentially buy it back from them.
A lot of times you have no choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this earlier example, if I've got 11 different crews out, let's just say, right, who are producing $25,000 a day.
Yeah.
And they literally cannot operate. I mean, if that system got shut down in that earlier example I said, we'd have a major problem on that day.
Are these like, are they I'm just curious, like the business, you think of like, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Like that would be one take on this. Do business owners cave to this a lot? Like, is it an effective route for them? Or I don't know if there's a percentage, or you can just maybe give a guess or just your overall impression as like how effective a tool is this and how often does it convert? How often do they actually pay out before that timer runs out?
Yeah, so a lot of times they catch you when you're not expecting it at all, and you're not ready for it. You don't have backups, and like Igor said, you need to run your operations. You have guys on the field.
Yeah.
If you're down for a full day, you have to think to yourself, how much am I losing? How
It
much
hurts
money?
badly enough.
Yeah,
And monetarily, but you've got a major customer delivery issue as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The other
so-
thing you'd mentioned offline, which I thought was really interesting, is so you talked about ransomware, and then you'd mentioned like ransomware is as a service.
Yeah, so it's gotten to the point where ransomware is so effective and it's such a powerful tool. It's really developed into its own industry. You can there are certain websites on the dark web that you can go on and you can actually get a hold of those tools yourself, and you can essentially wage a ransomware attack on anybody.
So this is like a digital mercenary. Like you could, I don't think this is likely today, but I don't know, maybe in 10 years it is. If you have 2 huge contractors and one of them really doesn't like the other, theoretically, I'm not saying they would, but the mechanisms are there so that they actually could hire someone to go out and do this dirty work and, inhibit a competitor or some other stakeholder that they wanted to inflict damage on. That's actually becoming increasingly common, is what you're saying.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's happened, but I definitely don't recommend to do it at home. It's highly illegal. You could also, if you don't want to do it yourself, you can hire a hacker that will do it for
The
you.
guy with the business card.
Yeah. Okay, to be clear, that is not what we're saying. I'm not advocating that as a business strategy at all. It just blows me away that has actually become available to some people if they were so inclined. Scary stuff. So what about wire transfer fraud?
Yeah, so wire transfer fraud is another type of attack that we're seeing a lot of nowadays. There's a lot of money there. So, contractors, for example, typically move around quite a bit of money.
A lot of money goes in and out, especially in certain contracting industries. Like you're constantly receiving from customers and you're pushing it out to everything from material supply vendors and suppliers, subcontractors, all different other types of vendors, whether it be a marketing firm or your accounting firm or whatever. But it's just a constant in and out of money. And not only that, it's typically often it's not controlled by the business owner themselves,
right?
Rather
an AP person,
an AP
AR
person, office manager, bookkeeper, maybe even contracted bookkeeper. These are people that aren't like they're doing this at high volume. Think of like a typical contracted bookkeeper or an AP person in house. If you're maybe a bit of a bigger company. These people are moving a lot of money regularly in many transactions with a lot of emails. They're probably not hyper in tune to some details. And these emails, I'm assuming, like in the case of wire transfer fraud, are not, like they're pretty sophisticated, right? They look like the real thing.
You can't tell the difference a lot of times. Yeah,
Right.
and a lot of times they would have compromised your mailbox. So they know, they can connect the dots fairly quick. They can figure out
When you're
who's
getting
running
these
AP.
invoices.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What the language looks like, timing as well. And they'll actually sit there in your mailbox and they will send your vendor, for example, an email on your behalf, asking them to change banking details, for example, to a client as well. And you won't even know that conversation is happening until it's too late because they know how to bury emails and how to hide things behind the scenes.
So just to be clear, Omar, to define this, what wire transfer fraud is it's someone pretending to be you or they're pretending to be your vendor, someone you do business with all the time, and saying, hey, you owe us for last month's job. Can you send something to here? That's what we mean by
so
that.
instead of actually going into your bank account and taking money out,
because banks are pretty secure, I think.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, you would hope
they're
so.
getting you to actually do it. You're taking the action, and therefore it's kind of gone in the wind at that point.
That's it.
Yeah,
So-
your supplier bill, your utility bill, your bookkeeper, not you, but your bookkeeper just thinks that he or she is paying that. Yeah, essentially.
So, but on the sophisticated point, it's not like this is like the Saudi prince or there was this the Nigerian scammer thing that was super popular at the end of the 90s, and we all heard about. Like these are not. It's not just like my baby boomer dad who's falling for these things. Like they're very sophisticated. Even a techie person that's pretty intelligent and reads a lot and stays up to date on all this stuff, they could be fooled because the degree to which these wire transfer frauds are imitating you or your vendor is so good that it's just like even a smart person gets duped.
Anybody could fall for it. A couple of years ago, we saw an example where a wire transfer fraud attack was essentially responsible for taking down or stealing a bunch of money from Facebook as well as Google as well. So, very, very techy people,
Right.
With extremely highly sophisticated security measures in place.
Literally send money to a hacker.
We're duped into,
That's
giving away
crazy.
hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Anything else? Any other major threats that we should be aware of?
I think phishing is another one that we should talk about. I mean, everyone has heard of phishing by now. A lot of times, phishing will take the form come in the form of an email. It can also be SMS, even an actual phone call as well. But what it is really is you get an email from someone pretending to be your boss, for example, telling you to do something. Or you get an email from Microsoft telling you, hey, there's been a unusual activity in your account. Click here to log in. The email might look like an exact email that you typically would get from Microsoft or Google, Dropbox, you name it. And you'll click on it. It will take you to a landing page that looks just like the landing page that you typically would log into Google with. And essentially, once you put in the username and password,
they
game
have
over.
It's compromised.
They got
Right.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's actually that same sort of like approach as wire transfer fraud, but different outcome. Wire transfer fraud, they're imitating something so that you
Send the money.
you send the money. This one, they're imitating something so that you give
send
them
it,
their
login
passwords,
credentials,
credentials,
yeah.
And that might
then-
lead to a wire
and then-
transfer fraud.
right.
Yeah,
or
and
many
once-
other things, right?
as well as
if-
ransomware and many
Totally.
other things. Usually, that is really the beginning of the attack. So, like 90% of the attacks that we're seeing in the industry will start from that one email.
because once they have the login credentials, then they've got an open world into all kinds of crazy shit.
I mean,
So-
Uber, for example, just got completely owned and compromised, and it all started from one phishing attack, and it just led into just the entire company essentially being compromised
Crazy.
and,
Yeah.
and hacked. Yeah.
Now, what about? Sorry, go ahead.
Benji, I was just going to say really quick.
Yeah.
In the Breakthrough Academy world, I've heard of this quite a number of times through members. This is quite a common thing, especially when you've got a team of staff, right? If they're processing a lot of information, like a lot of emails, a lot of requests, they likely are not as attentive as you might assume that they are to some of these things, right? And they're just honestly doing their job to the best of their ability. And you're driving to a meeting, you have a meeting, you're with your accountant, whatever. And on that Tuesday morning, your bookkeeper happens to have just replied to this email or logged in or thought he logged into some sort of credential. And that is the beginning of, what is going to come down the line over the next few months of a lot of really difficult stuff where they've actually fully compromised your passwords in your system, right?
That's it. Yeah, a lot of times when it happens, you don't even really think too much of it. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, I tried to log in, didn't work, whatever. You close the browser. And then a few weeks later, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah. Interesting. You mentioned like there's email phishing. There's also there's phone phishing. So is this like when I get a phone and it's like attention, you are wanted by the government of Canada for a criminal lawsuit against blah blah blah, and if you don't do this and is that literally like phone phishing?
Yeah, that is exactly that is an example of phishing as well.
And then I
Exactly.
also get ones via text now where it's like your Netflix account has been suspended, or you've won $1,000 like award with a gift card with Amazon. Click here to whatever. Those are text versions.
look super sketchy though to begin with.
They
I
look
think
super
what we're
sketchy.
talking about is stuff that is legit because they actually know that you get an invoice from GAF or you get these invoices for your company account from Verizon or whatever. And they actually know the timing. The email looks 100% right. The landing page looks 100% right. The whole thing, right?
Yeah, but you'd be surprised. Even the low scale ones, they seem to be quite effective. People fall for it.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to just talk quite directly here to the business owner about why we're actually talking about all of this and why, Benji, you and I talked a while back of having Omer on the show. So we've been using cyber unit for a couple of years now, actually, at Breakthrough Academy and Contractor Evolution, to manage all of our cybersecurity and IT systems. I think that it is so important that as a business owner, you're aware of what can interrupt your operations. And you do it right now. Like we all do it. You're aware of like, if I hire this really crappy project manager, I could have major issues on job sites with our other employees. If we don't maintain our vehicles or we have like a really shitty fleet of trucks, we could have major disruptions, right? We've got material issues. Like you think about all these things on a regular basis, but you don't think about the downside of what could happen in a situation like this until it happens, right? And a couple of years ago at Breakthrough Academy, I became pretty aware of this. I was like, man, we do so much stuff to mitigate risk in the way that we recruit, in the way that we set up our SOPs so that that stuff is done procedurally. There's all this stuff that we do, but I was like, man, we've got a gaping hole in a ton of our security, right? Like maybe Benji's got a little thing in his notes in his iPhone. It's just called passwords with all the passwords there, right? We're using the same password across a ton of different systems. I didn't know, we've got like 40 different staff with 40 different computers, like who's got a firewall, who doesn't, who's got virus scan, who doesn't, who's got two-factor authentication and stuff. I have no idea. And then at the same time, I thought, okay, what's the downside and what do we have? I was like, we have information on thousands of contracting companies, their owners. We have a ton of their financial data that all lives in our system. We've got their credit card informations, right? So every business is a bit different, but the point is you've got a ton of valuable data. And I was like, man, this could be a total catastrophe if there's a breach, which based on the passwords that I know that we were using, the lack of two-factor authentication, the lack of firewalls, any kind of email monitoring, I was like, we are overdue and ripe for something major to go down. But again, I find it interesting. Like most people think of like the much more practical things of like, hey, well, what if someone breaks into our yard or takes the equipment out of the vans or whatever?
Steal some copper from the site.
Totally. But just because you physically, visually don't see this sitting in front of you, because it's like, what's that movie? Is it Zoolander? It's like, it's in the computer. Just because it's like in the thing, doesn't it?
The potential disruptions are just as bad. I think if not worse.
If not worse.
Yeah.
If you can't run your crews, you could have catastrophic brand credibility, like a brand credibility issue if you suddenly email thousands of people asking for certain things, right? There's just so much that can go wrong. And that's where my initial reach out and my search to a whole bunch of companies, which is how we found Cyber Unit. And I remember our first conversation a few years ago. I don't know if you remember, but I sat down and I was like, there's so much shit that can go wrong. We need to talk about all this.
I definitely remember that conversation.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that, again, if this is really like, if this isn't on your mind or you're listening to some of this stuff and you're like, man, I actually don't really, I don't have much in the way of protection on this. It's probably time to make some moves, because you could run into a situation where this could really, really disrupt your business and or cost you a huge amount of money.
Yeah, and to Omar's point earlier, and I don't want to be doom and gloom. Like, just look at the projections on this and where this is headed. This is likely getting worse, not better. And so learning how to play some good defense is probably in your best interest sooner than later.
Yeah, and you want to deal with this and get some of this infrastructure in place before something really bad goes wrong.
That's exactly it. You want to be proactive about this.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm assuming that most people call you when there's a major issue.
That is it. Yeah. So it does happen quite a lot. A lot of companies don't think about it until it's too late. And the reality is we get a lot of those phone calls, and sometimes we can help. We love to help, but other times there's nothing to do about it. It's too late. So when you're reactive and when you're calling us after an attack, it can be very expensive to put the fires out and to get you back up and running. It could actually be a lot more effective, and just in general, it's way better to call us before. It's a lot cheaper. A lot cheaper. Like, it's a fraction of the cost to get the measures and the controls in place before an attack.
Yeah, this is black and white simple to me. I mean, this is why I don't think twice about we pay a Cyber Unit from a consulting perspective to set this up. We're paying for this software to be in place. But to me, it is a total no-brainer. It's no different than why you would insure your fleet of trucks, really.
It's almost like insurance nowadays. In fact, your insurance provider will want to see, and if they haven't already reached out to you, they probably will.
That's actually a really interesting point. You guys helped us literally, I think, in the last week. So we have our annual general business insurance, which is general liability. It's errors and omissions. We've got a whole bunch of components to it. And what was interesting is this year, for the very first time, we've had so many renewals. It's the same thing, it's like end of September now. In this year, there was a mandatory cybersecurity questionnaire for them to understand what the levels of our different cybersecurity are. And that's what I think you helped us with. Yeah. But again, it just goes to show what you were talking about, that even insurance providers are very aware of this, and they're judging your risk based on what you do or don't have in place.
Insurance companies are pretty smart. If they're asking for that in clauses of contracts and asking for questionnaires,
there's got to be a reason why.
There's probably a reason why.
They've been losing a lot of money. Because of cyber attacks is the reality. And we're getting a lot of companies reaching out to us nowadays, sending us that same form that you guys sent us and asking us, how do we fill it in? And a lot of times they would have maybe sent it to the insurance provider or to the broker, and it comes back with a rejection letter on it, right? Yeah. So, definitely something to think about. And if it hasn't come up yet with your insurance provider, it probably will.
Yeah. So I'm curious if there's things that you see really commonly out there in your work, especially with small business owners in particular, rather than just individuals. But What do you see entrepreneurs, leaders of businesses do that just like drives you see red, that makes you kind of go, oh, no, no, no? Like, what are the huge red flags?
There's a number of them. One that comes to mind right away is Apple devices. A lot of people have that misconception that, hey, I got a Mac, it's bulletproof.
Right.
I don't need an antivirus. I don't need to think about security. But the reality is hackers are aware of that misconception. And so they're actually targeting Apple devices quite heavily nowadays.
Just to confirm, it's completely not true, right? Like I've got a MacBook Pro, I've got an iPad, I have an iPhone. Like none of those devices are like, they're the furthest from bulletproof, right? Just in themselves, or the way they come out of the box. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, nothing is bulletproof anymore.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know where that came from. Like it was maybe some early days marketing of Mac that was effective or something. But I remember as a
probably
kid,
from the 80s or 90s. Yeah.
I remember as a kid getting my first ever MacBook and sort of being like, oh yeah, it's a Mac. Like doesn't get viruses.
And yeah, for some reason, it was a long time ago. I haven't seen it on any marketing collateral or any apps.
Yeah, societally, that's kind of carried on. Yeah.
It's just kind of carried on. So yeah, that's a big one for that we're seeing nowadays. A lot of companies after an attack will come to us and Apple devices everywhere, and they're surprised that they got hacked. Or even react proactively, they'll come to us and want help, and we're coming in and we're seeing that like they're all Apple, but like little to no security whatsoever, and it's low hanging fruit is what it is.
So I shouldn't let my iPhone and my MacBook lull me into a false sense of security. These are just as vulnerable as any other machine out there.
Exactly.
What else?
Passwords. Passwords is a really big one. Maybe using the same password everywhere, maybe using a very, very weak password. Oftentimes we actually see people writing down all their password on a notepad or even a document that they straight up will name it passwords and save it in Google Drive or on their desktop. And the reality is hackers are smart. And they've seen it all. And so a lot of times when they get into your system or your computer, that will be one of the first things that they'll look for.
If you've got that going on, you probably deserve to get hacked.
They get into your system and the first thing to do is a search query for files named passwords. And there's the Excel spreadsheet and there they all are.
Yeah.
So that's a big no-no. What else?
Backups. We talk to our clients a lot about backups, and you really have to be ready for the worst case scenario. And a lot of people are not. A lot of people are trusting, maybe over trusting third-party providers, cloud, SaaS providers, CRM, email, whatever it is. A lot of times, if you actually take the time to read the terms of use, they will straight up tell you that you are responsible for your own backups. They're responsible for certain things, but there is that whole clause around shared responsibility. Have a look at it or talk to your vendor about it. Ask them about shared responsibility. Am I responsible for my backups, or are you guys taking care of it for me?
So in those terms of service, those like agreements that we all know, you look at and you scroll, hit accept. Somewhere in that, those long pages of fine print that you just skipped over, it says somewhere in there, we're not backing this stuff up for you. You need to do that on your own.
And I'm not talking about small vendors. I'm talking about the major
big
vendors,
ones too.
Google and Microsoft. They are not responsible.
So what you're saying, like, so we let's just say, so I run a landscaping company. We've got email on like G Suite. We've got a bunch of our all files live inside of Dropbox. You're saying that in addition to the regular desktop to cloud sync with Dropbox, that I should run like a hard drive type backup as well on some sort of cadence.
You definitely want to do that, yeah.
Right.
Which is not convenient. It can take a lot of time, but there are ways to automate that as well.
It's not a huge deal. Like I have an external hard drive that just plugs into my Mac, and it does like a backup off a physical backup onto it.
Just make sure that external hard drive is encrypted as well, because they do tend to get lost or stolen, of course.
Right.
So you always want to make sure that the external hard drive is encrypted
with a password encryption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other huge red flags?
Yeah, so with passwords, we also like to talk about multi-factor authentication or a second layer of authentication, essentially. What that means, if you haven't heard of two-factor authentication, you probably should be using it right about now. You put in your email and password, for example, to log into your 365, your email system, or your CRM. After that, to make sure that you are really, in fact, who you say you are, you need to be able to prove that. What they do is they'll send you a 6-digit code, or your phone will generate a one-time 6-digit code that you have to feed into the system to prove that you are who you say you are, because it's quite easy. Like we talked about phishing, it's quite easy to get a hold of your password. Sometimes you can even guess it.
Right.
And so two-factor or multi-factor authentication is an absolute must for all of your systems. Think about your banking, think about email, CRM, anywhere where there's critical data or sensitive data about your operations or your clients, you want to have two-factor authentication, but ideally everywhere.
We got that set up a little while ago, and I remember kind of groaning and be like, oh, this is really difficult, and I have to remember all this stuff. But I think we'll talk about this in a minute. Like, there are just some really, really good tools that will help you have very, very complex and unique passwords stored. You don't have to remember it. You don't end up like me, where like, oh my God, I've forgotten my password for, my banking to get in. I can't tell you how many times I've been late on a cell phone bill because I've forgotten a password and then just been too like embarrassed that I forgot the password to get back in. So we'll get to the tools in a second, but there's some really great solutions out there to help you store all this stuff. You don't need to remember this stuff off the top of your head, and it certainly doesn't need to go in a file named passwords. What can you say about antiviruses and the role that they play or don't play? It's been a long time since I did any reading on this. Like, are these effective? Should we be looking at them? Is that a part of the playbook?
Yeah, so definitely antivirus solutions is something that you have to be thinking about. Ideally, you have that in place from the moment you deploy a computer or a server. But you have to also make sure that you have the right type of an antivirus solution. So there's the whole conversation around kind of the traditional type of antivirus solution versus next generation antivirus solutions, which is really, if you're using an antivirus solution, I don't want to name any names specifically, but some of the free ones out there, some of the more common ones that we've grown to know and like over the years, they are essentially they're basically ineffective against some of the type of malware that's coming down the pipeline nowadays. A lot of times too, what hackers will do is they'll straight up, if they want to, infect your computer with ransomware, for example, what they could do also is they could literally open up your antivirus solution, and they have ways to automate that and just turn it off.
Yeah.
And if you can turn off an antivirus solution, it's essentially useless.
What good is it doing?
So Omer, let me ask you this. So if I'm listening to this, I'm driving my truck and I run a contracting business. I've got a whole bunch of employees. We've got a ton of customers. We've got leads. We've got money going in and out. And I'm listening to this and saying, well, I don't really have any good systems across my staff to be monitoring their computers, their mobile devices with like antivirus stuff, firewall stuff. We don't have any kind of password controller, no multi-factor authentication, all this kind of stuff. I'm listening to this and I'm like, man, I might need to be a bit more kind of aware of this. What should a business owner do here? Like, can you take us through a bit of like a cybersecurity like starter pack? Like where should they even begin?
Okay, so we talked about passwords, right? So this is an exercise that I like to do with clients and companies. So think about what kind of passwords you're using. Are they more or less the same across the board? A lot of times they would be, and they might be even fairly weak passwords to the point where if I saw one password, I could
log into a ton of stuff.
Figure out the rest of your passwords and work my way through your system and completely take you down. So the reality that we live in nowadays is you have to have unique passwords and complex passwords across the board. So every password needs to be unique.
Like how many symbols would you say is a minimum?
Like characters?
12, 16,
I usually recommend at least 12.
At least 12.
Yeah, and a combination of everything.
Right.
Lowercase, uppercase, alphanumeric, everything.
Numbers, symbols.
But you are not, just to be clear, you are not writing each one of these super complex like passwords with crazy characters down. Like there's software to
right.
do this.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to get into. So there are solutions out there, essentially password management solutions that allow you to be able to keep track of all those passwords in a secure way, and they also make your passwords more accessible. So a lot of times you'll have that piece of paper underneath your keyboard that has all your passwords. Get rid of that. Use a password management solution, and use the right type of password management solution that will improve your security, but also your productivity. Because all of a sudden you find that you have your passwords available to you on your phone, and if you need to go on somebody else's computer, there are ways that you can get a hold of those passwords securely, of course. And there are different types of password management solutions out there. There are some free ones as well. I do not recommend to use any of the free ones. The two that we typically recommend, one being LastPass, and the other one is 1Password. And there are a few other ones that are really good as well. But yeah, definitely avoid the free ones.
I really like LastPass. I'm a big fan. I've heard a few people kind of like like, oh, this is complicated. It's really, really good for, like I said, just like not being stuck on a login page and feeling like an idiot. It's also really good for team collaboration for a business in particular.
Yeah.
You may have a couple different like people on the marketing team, for example, that need to get into Canva, or people on the operations team need to get into something else. So you have the ability to very safely share complex passwords between team members, but then no one else. So it's not just like protecting yourself. There's actually some utility, some competitive advantage that I've noticed by having LastPass in particular for us.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like it does make you more productive. You are able to share passwords across specific teams in your organization. And what we've seen in the past quite often as well is that there usually is that one person in your company that will have the access to, like, administrative access to your email system or your banking details. And what you have to think about is what happens if that person gets hit by a bus or if they have to leave you for whatever reason, right? Yeah. So with the right solution in place, there are ways that you can get up and running, and really what it comes down,
you control it. Like you have a master company account, and then each staff member has an account, but you can shut them off or you can pull the passwords from it, right?
Yeah. But don't get me wrong. I mean, it's not all rainbows and butterflies. So you have to make sure that you deploy it in the proper way, because if somebody gets into your password management system, they essentially have the keys to the castle. So you really have to make sure, again, it comes back to two-factor authentication. Like you have to have two-factor authentication on.
That's the second thing, though. This is different now. This is related, but different, right?
Yeah, but I would recommend definitely do not deploy a password management system without a really strong password to get into that system, as well as two-factor authentication on top of that.
Both of those things.
You have to have both of those things. Yeah. Okay, let me just talk about this for a second. From a business owner's perspective, it would be ludicrous for you, in my opinion, we're talking about using free, like not using this or using cheap ones or free ones. It's ludicrous to do that. You're saying like, well, I don't want to go through either the pain in the butt of the implementation or the moaning from my staff, or I don't want to pay what is our LastPass, like $8 per user per month, maybe, I don't know,
it's
something
nominal.
like that.
It's nominal.
In the grand scheme of your P&L, it's essentially zero. I know what you're talking about. You're like, well, could be a bit of a pain in the butt to use. We've had that from a lot of our staff when we implemented it. And I will tell you, it is sometimes inconvenient. So yesterday I'm on a flight, I'm trying to log in, and I use it for everything. I'm logging in, I'm booking an RV, right, for this coming weekend, to like a trailer to pull behind my truck for this concert. And I'm trying to log into this thing. I'm on the internet in the plane, and it's trying to do a two-factor authentication through LastPass, but I don't have the reception on the phone, so I couldn't get in. So yeah, maybe that's a bit inconvenient. Or this morning I'm at the dentist and I needed to pull up the insurance card, and it took me an extra 2 minutes because I had to log into LastPass on my phone, two-factor authentication. So yes, I understand there's one or two roadblocks. However, you cannot let this little bit of inconvenience block your viewpoint on what is important for your business
and what's at
your
stake.
Business and what's at stake, and what the right decision is for you to make as a business owner as you navigate some of these. So don't worry about the slight inconvenience of two-factor authentication, or having to use a password manager, or your staff complaining because it takes them an extra 90 seconds to log into stuff once a day or whatever. That is minuscule compared to the downside or risk of not having that.
I have a question about multi-factor, and then we should move on. Are some better than others? So you can set it up so that you actually use an authenticator app like Google Authenticator. Another version is if you're getting into Apple, an Apple login sometimes, and you set up on iCloud, it will be like, let us send a code to this other device. That's a version of it. The other one I've seen is text message. We will text the phone on file a code, and then you'll input it here. Is one of those safer or less safe than the others?
Yeah, that's a great question, Benji. So actually, the SMS authentication or the SMS option that you mentioned, the text message, is probably the least secure one. I don't recommend that at all. Unfortunately, a lot of times, even with banking, I find it's kind of strange, but a lot of times you'll find that's the only option you have. So it's definitely better than nothing, right? But there are ways to bypass that. So if an attacker is really coming after you and they want to get in,
can they intercept text messages?
There are ways to intercept it. It's called SIM hijacking. There are ways to do it. We've seen it happen. It's not hard. The reality is really anybody could walk into to Rogers or one of those carriers kiosks and pretend to be you and essentially pay some money, and the guy behind the counter will hand over a new SIM card, and that's what SIM hijacking is. and it is quite common. So for that reason,
They'd have to be really motivated, but it is possible.
Exactly.
So
It is possible.
Anyway, a cybersecurity starter pack. Let's get back to the question. Like, I'm listening to this. I don't have much of this in place. What do I need to be aware of in my cybersecurity starter packs? We talked about like a unique passwords, i.e. an actual password manager software tool. We talked about multi-factor authentication. What would be one or two others?
So updates, that's something you can do on your own. Just
Like, you're talking about software.
Yeah, so keep your devices up to date. So not just software, but also hardware. Like your wireless router at home or at the office. You got to make sure that thing is up to date. Your printers. Whenever you see a pop-up that says update, for example, for software for Zoom, a lot of us are busy and you need to get on that next call, but it goes a long way if you're keeping your devices up to date and your software
like
up to
20
date.
seconds.
It does, yeah. But we're all busy. I get it. But there are ways to automate that too. And whenever you have an option to like automatically do updates, definitely go for that option. But yeah, definitely keep your devices, keep your hardware and software, operating systems, everything up to date.
Yeah, and that's because, just to confirm, that is because the actual software provider is releasing security updates as they find holes in it, I'm assuming, right? Like, so when Apple's like, you need to upgrade to iOS 12.6 instead of 12.5, they may have found like a security breach or hole in 12.5.
A lot of times that's exactly right. Yeah, a lot of times somebody else even found it for them and notified them about it. And by the time they release that patch or the update, it's already been what we call exploited in the wild. So hackers are already targeting that type of router that you have at home. And so by the time that update is out, you need to make sure that you get on it as soon as possible.
It happened 2 weeks ago for all Mac devices. We needed to do an update for that exact reason.
Yeah, it happens almost on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
Google Chrome as well is a big one. We've seen that a number of times this year alone. You would have seen that update option on the top right corner. Whenever you see that, please just take a moment and update it. It just takes a second.
One other thing that I'm wondering about, and just still in the starter pack thing, is with so much of our tech stack being in the cloud now, we would use QuickBooks or some other accounting software. We would have a CRM. We may have a project management tool. We may have we may use plugins to that CRM for different sort of functionalities that we desire. There's so much stuff that we're kind of doing up there. How can we make sure that these tools, who we're entrusting our precious data and therefore the operation of our business with, how can we make sure they're legit and they're following protocols and they're up to snuff?
Yeah, so there's a number of kind of key red flags that you can look for. One of them I'll say is, a lot of times people will go for the free stuff, and nothing's free. They have to make money somehow. Nobody's going to give you a free software or a free plugin. So if it's free, if you're not paying for the product, you essentially are the product.
Interesting.
Right? So you have to be thinking about that. They might be mining your data. Your data might be used for marketing purposes or even more horrible things that you might not be aware of. So I would recommend to avoid free stuff altogether for your business. One other thing that you can look for as a red flag is just the option for multi-factor authentication. If you don't see that option there, that usually is a giveaway that they don't have your security top of mind. And that's a big one. Another thing is just do your research. Don't rush into it. Do your research and Google the name of the company, add to the search security incident or breach and see what comes up. And another thing you could do is also go to the footer of the website and look for privacy policy, look for security. Just make sure you really are trusting your data with the right provider, your right vendor.
Yeah. Awesome. Omer. Overarchingly, I think, if you're serious in the game of business, right, and you are a career businessman or businesswoman, there's like real basics. You gotta, you probably know a lot about like the technicalities of your business, but you also got to know how to get an office lease. You need to know how to set up basic business insurance. This is just another one of these things. Like you have a duty to know a little bit, just some real basics on cybersecurity. And if you're not, I think that you're exposing yourself to risk. Or if you're trying to save a couple $1,000 on a multi-million-dollar P&L, it's like not worth it. But the core point is you don't need to be a cybersecurity professional monitoring the dark web, which I don't even know what that means, but sounds pretty serious. What I think is way smarter to do, which is what I did and what we do, which is just reach out to a guy like Omer. So if a business owner is listening to this and they're like, I probably have more holes than is good in my setup, how can people get a hold of you and get a hold of CyberUnit?
Yeah, please. I especially proactively, I always enjoy having those conversations. If I can't help you, for the very least, let's have a conversation. I can maybe point you in the right direction. But if you want to have a conversation, or maybe a review of what you currently have in place. You might even already have a provider, but maybe you want a second opinion.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to chat. So our website, cyberunit.com, you can find us there. Book a meeting with us. We'd love to talk to you. We're all over social media as well. Just look for Cyber Unit. And yeah, if you want to have a chat, we'd be more than happy to talk.
Go talk to Omar if you're sitting in the truck kind of going, oh shit. That's probably a really, really good place to start. He's a friend of ours. He's a friend of the show, and obviously just chock full of wisdom. So thanks for being here, man. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Omer.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Contractor Evolution. If you've already subscribed to our channel, consider sharing this episode with another contractor who you think needs to hear it.